What you're looking at is the most famous skyline on Earth. 8 million people, hundreds of skyscrapers, one small island. But 400 years ago, there was nothing here. Just forest, rivers, and silence. This island, Manhattan, was covered in thick forest. Two powerful rivers flanked its sides, the Hudson to the west, the East River to the east. For thousands of years, it belonged to the Lenape people. They called it Mannahatta, Island of Many Hills. They fished its waters, hunted its woods, and lived in harmony with the land. No streets, no buildings, no noise, just nature. This was Manhattan in 1600. Remember that image, because everything is about to change. In 1609, English explorer Henry Hudson, sailing for the Dutch, entered the harbor looking for a shortcut to Asia. What he found was far more valuable. The Dutch returned as traders, saw opportunity, and in 1624 they stayed. They built a small fort at the southern tip, Fort Amsterdam, and around it grew a tiny settlement called New Amsterdam. Population, just a few hundred. In 1626, Dutch Director General Peter Minuit purchased the entire island from the Lenape for 60 guilders worth of trade goods, roughly $1,000 in today's money. New Amsterdam was never meant to be a great city. It was a trading post built for profit. But something unexpected began. Cobblestone streets appeared. Dutch-style brick houses rose. A canal cut through the center, just like home in Holland. Windmills turned on the waterfront. In 1653, the Dutch built a wooden wall across the northern edge to guard against British raids. That wall ran along a dirt path. That dirt path became Wall Street. By 1660, New Amsterdam had 1,000 residents, a city hall, a church, a school, and a jail. Small, but alive. Then, in August 1664, 4 British warships sailed into the harbor, cannons aimed at the town. Governor Peter Stuyvesant wanted to fight, but his own citizens refused. Without a single shot, New Amsterdam became New York, named after the Duke of York. 3 decades of Dutch history were renamed overnight. The British kept the streets and buildings, but the flag changed, and New York's destiny was forever altered. Under British rule, the city grew faster than ever. Streets pushed north. Merchants and traders flooded in. The harbor became one of the busiest in the world. By 1750, 18,000 people called it home. The streets were crowded, noisy, and bursting with commerce. But tension was building. Colonists grew tired of British taxes and control. Protests erupted. The Stamp Act riots shook the streets. Then, in August 1776, just weeks after the Declaration of Independence, 32,000 British troops, the largest invasion force Britain had ever sent, landed in New York. George Washington's army was outnumbered 3-1. He retreated. Weeks later, a massive fire destroyed nearly a quarter of the city. New York endured 7 long years of British occupation, the longest of any American city during the Revolution. On November 25, 1783, Evacuation Day, the last British soldiers left. George Washington rode back into cheering crowds. America had won. New York became the first capital of the United States. On April 30th, 1789, Washington was inaugurated president on the balcony of Federal Hall on Wall Street. In 1811, city planners made a bold decision. They drew a grid across the entire mostly empty island. 155 streets east to west, 12 avenues north to south. Critics called it arrogant. History called it genius. That grid still shapes New York today. Then, in 1825, the Erie Canal opened. Goods from the entire American interior poured into New York's port. The economy exploded. Millions of immigrants followed, fleeing famine, poverty, and war. The Irish arrived first during the Great Famine of 1845. They built much of the city. The Lower East Side became the most densely populated place on Earth. In 1892, Ellis Island opened. Thousands passed through daily from Italy, Russia, Poland, Greece, China, arriving with nothing, building everything. Manhattan was still an island, cut off from Brooklyn. Ferries weren't enough, so engineers built the Brooklyn Bridge. 14 years, hundreds of millions in today's dollars, and 27 lives lost. When it opened in 1883, it was the longest suspension bridge in the world. People wept. The skyline began its dramatic rise. Steel frames and electric elevators removed height limits. Ironworkers, Irish, Italian, Mohawk, walked steel beams hundreds of feet up with no safety nets. They were called cowboys in the sky. In 1913, the Woolworth Building became the tallest on Earth at 792 feet. Then came the 1920s race, Chrysler versus 40 Wall Street. Chrysler secretly built a 185-foot spire inside and raised it at the last moment, only to lose the title a year later to the Empire State Building in 1931. 1,454 feet tall, the Roaring Twenties were electric, jazz in Harlem, flappers in speakeasies, fortunes on Wall Street. Then, on October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression hit hard. World War II revived the city. The Brooklyn Navy Yard built warships day and night. In 1945, victory brought ticker tape parades and a population peak of nearly 8 million. The city felt invincible. But trouble was coming. Highways carved through neighborhoods. Middle-class families fled to the suburbs. By the 1970s, New York was broke, burning, and broken. Crime soared. The South Bronx became a global symbol of urban collapse. In 1975, the city nearly went bankrupt. When President Carter visited in 1977, he was speechless at the devastation. Yet the comeback began. Through the 80s and 90s, crime dropped dramatically. 75% in a single decade. Times Square was cleaned up, investment returned, neighborhoods came back to life. Then, on September 11, 2001, terror struck. 2 planes hit the Twin Towers. Nearly 3,000 died. The world watched in horror. But New York rebuilt. One World Trade Center rose, the tallest in the Western Hemisphere. Hudson Yards transformed the last wild corner of Manhattan. Tonight, 8.3 million people will sleep in these 5 boroughs. Hundreds of languages will echo through the streets. Thousands of restaurants will stay open past midnight. The subway will run all night, just as it has since 1904. From forest, to fort, to colonial town, to revolutionary city, to industrial giant, to capital of the world. 400 years, one island, the greatest city ever built, New York City, 1624 to 2024. And it's still not finished.